All right, hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Enhancing State-Regional Partnerships, a closer look at economic development districts and the CEDS. I'm Brett Schwartz, an Associate Director at the NATO Research Foundation. My organization is a nonprofit research affiliate of the National Association of Development Organizations, or NATO, which represents regional development organizations all across the country, including the National Network of Economic Development Districts, or EDDs. And today we'll be exploring regional state partnerships through the lens of EDDs, which you'll hear much more about in just a few minutes. But in a nutshell, EDDs are multi-jurisdictional planning and development agencies federally designated by the U.S. Economic Development Administration, EDA. There are nearly 400 EDDs all across the country that encourage economic development planning and project implementation in distressed urban, suburban, and rural regions. So we're really grateful to be co-sponsoring today's webinar with two of our partners on an EDA-funded research and training project. And so we're happy to be here with the State International Development Organization, CITO, and the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, CREC. You'll hear much more about this project later in the session from my colleague Merib Hagos at CREC. But for right now, I'd like to turn things over to Rachel Adams, the Program Manager at CITO, for some welcoming remarks before we start our presentation. So Rachel, you're on. I know you had some webcam challenges, but we can certainly hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brett. And apologies, everyone. So I've just had a day of technical difficulties today. So we're just going to keep on trucking along with that. So again, thank you, Brett. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Adams, and I just wanted to thank you very much for coming to today's webinar on enhancing state and regional partnerships, a closer look at economic development districts and their CEDS. I am the program manager with the State International Development Organization, known as CITO, as you can see on the screen. For those of you who are not familiar with CITO, just to give you a little bit of background, CITO is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization which supports states' effort on international trade development. CITO is an affiliate of the Council of State Governments, and its members are comprised of the governor's international trade offices. CITO specifically helps international trade offices better serve U.S. businesses by sharing best practices and resources, developing and advocating for policies that help a state boost export and attract FDI, as well as serve as a resource and liaison to the federal trade agencies, Congress, and international partners. CITO is fortunate to represent all 50 U.S. state trade offices and 5 U.S. territories trade offices, many of whom are on this webinar today. So I just wanted to extend a very warm welcome to our CITO members who are joining the call today. Our members have been actively involved in this project that we have been partnering with NATO on, and EDA and the CREC. So we're really pleased to be here today with them. I also am grateful to join the Southwest Tennessee Development District and the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development to listen to their insights today and provide information about the importance of CEDS planning, which is maybe a new concept to several of our members. So we're really pleased to learn a lot today. So again, I just wanted to thank you again for hosting today's session. There were a couple of things, Brett, if you don't mind. I just wanted to add a little bit of information about the project that we're currently doing. So as part of the EDA project that CREC was awarded, the research team mapped 52 state economic development strategic plans and 379 comprehensive economic development strategies. So the CREC is actually now has a database of 20,000 records of economic development strategies, and that CREC can research by state, type of strategy, and numerous other variables. So just Merib Hagos and Mark Tropy are from the CREC team, and they're actually going to be joining us in our conference in Seattle next month. So they will be looking to get some information and gather some information for our members on what is in the database of your states and regions, what priorities might your states be, and your regions collaborate more effectively. So Mark and Merib are actually going to be at the conference, and we will have a representative from CREC come on in a little bit, but they're going to be offering customized technical assistance. And so we just want to make sure that anyone that's part of our membership in the international trade offices do get the opportunity to connect with them. And if you would like to talk with us a little bit more about that, we do have some information that we're going to send out after the webinar today, and we'll get a follow-up meeting scheduled. So Brett, with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you. Thank you for letting me take a few minutes, and I'll let you proceed. So thank you again. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, Rachel. Thanks so much. Yeah, we really value our partnership with CEDS and CREC on this project. It's been a great collaboration. So thanks for the introduction, the heads up. Hope a lot of you can join the group at that upcoming conference. So with that, we're going to start moving towards our presentations, but just want to share some quick logistics. Been through many webinars before, I'm sure, but here's the lowdown. If you have any questions for the panel, feel free to use the questions box on the right side of the screen on the drop-down menu, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar. A recording of the webinar will be made available at our website, nato.org, likely by tomorrow, and will also be emailed to all registrants as well, so you get a recording of that very soon. Also, at the end of the webinar, a short survey will pop up on the screen. Please take a minute or two to fill that out. It really helps us with a lot of the work that we're doing on this project, which you'll hear much more about today, and to hear more about ways that we can kind of support you and meet your needs and goals as well. And of course, have contact information here for myself, Rachel, and Merab, if you want to reach out to us to learn a little bit more. So with that, here's this great roster of presenters that we have today joining us. So first we'll hear from David Ives, who is the Deputy Director of Performance Research and National Technical Assistance Division at the U.S. Economic Development Administration. And Dave will give us an overview and a foundation to learn more about EDA, EDDs, and the CEDS, which I know is a lot of acronyms that we're throwing at you, but I'm sure after you hear from Dave, who's an expert in all of this, you'll have a really firm understanding in all of these and how they relate to your work. Next, we'll hear from Merab Hagos, who is the Program Manager at the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness. As we mentioned earlier, it's been a wonderful partnership working with them and CEDS to learn more about ways to strengthen relationships between EDDs and state economic development offices, and Merab will be sharing more about the work and some of our early findings that we've had from the project. And then we're going to wrap things up by having kind of an on-the-ground case study conversation with our partners in Tennessee. We'll hear from Brooksy Carlton, as the Assistant Commissioner of Rural Development at the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, and she'll be joined by Joe Barker, the Executive Director at the Southwest Tennessee Development Districts. And the two of them will be in conversation, just kind of sharing what their working partnership looks like, the real value and benefits in the states and regions working together, and hopefully will inspire you to pursue similar approaches and strategies. And then, of course, we'll wrap things up at the end with any questions and conversations. So with that, let me turn things over, as I mentioned, to Dave Ives at EDA, who will give us a really solid background to kick off our conversation. So Dave, the floor is yours.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Brett, and thanks to all for joining this afternoon. I'm gonna actually go off camera so that folks can concentrate on their slides and not me, but I'll be back for questions at the end. So, before we kind of dive into EDD, a little bit more on the EDDs and the CEDS, I wanted to just step back and take a minute and talk a little bit about EDA as an organization. I know some of you are very familiar with EDA and have worked with EDA in the past, but I know there are others that may be new to EDA, so I kind of wanted to start there. So next slide. Thanks, Brett. EDA, the Economic Development Administration, is the economic development arm of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And in that role, we provide grant-based, what we call investments, but they're grants, to units of state and local government and nonprofits in communities and regions suffering from economic distress. And we define that distress as either high unemployment, low per capita income, or some type of special need, which is usually defined as some type of disruption to the underlying economic base of that particular region. It could be a natural disaster, out-migration, loss of a major employer, something along those lines. And really those grants, the grants that we provide, are intended to help communities and regions build the capacity for economic development. And when we talk about capacity building, we're really talking about it kind of in a much larger way, and not maybe how you think about capacity building. Because when most folks hear the term capacity building, they think about additional staffing or resources. We're talking about the entire waterfront of capacities that communities and regions may need to effectively engage in economic development. So from that perspective, capacity building is really about helping communities and regions better position their assets so that the private sector can succeed. And that really is the role of the public sector in economic development. Really, it's to help these communities and regions better understand and position their assets so that the private sector will want to establish businesses there and grow those businesses. And this will mean different things to different communities, I should say, as well, when we're talking about capacity building. Some communities are going to need that basic infrastructure, that roadways and water and sewer lines. And other communities may need something a little bit different. They may need help establishing business incubators or broadband. And then there are others that still may need something else, like the formation of partnerships or networks. So really, like this concept of capacity building is really going to vary depending on each community and what their needs may be. And in order to help these communities and regions build that capacity for economic development, we have a suite of grant programs that kind of run the entire gamut of the economic development spectrum, from kind of the initial plan, and we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. Also helping them kind of on the technical assistance side, the pre-development side, with grants that help economic development decision makers make better economic development decisions, with things like feasibility studies and impact analyses, things along those lines. And then all the way to kind of more of the side of our grants, the infrastructure construction, so things like the roads and water sewer lines I mentioned earlier, and broadband. So it kind of runs, like I said, the entire gamut. And in terms of EDA's funding overall, traditionally the program budget for EDA has run around 300 million annually, give or take 50 million. And obviously it's been much different the last 2 years. We've received over 4.5 billion in additional funding to provide grants to communities, specifically to recover from the pandemic. So we've had a lot more grant funding to give out recently, but traditionally it runs around 350 million. In terms of EDA structure, we're really focused on our 6 regional offices, which kind of breaks the country up into 6 separate regional offices. And that's where most of the grant making takes place, are those regional offices. There's a state point of contact for every state. And really that is where EDA's grant making infrastructure exists primarily. So that's why most of the grants flow from there. And anytime you're thinking about engaging with EDA or seeking out EDA as a potential partner in whatever efforts you've got going on, the best place to start again is with our regional offices. So you can find those points of contact as well as a host of other information at the website that I have there at the bottom, www.eda.gov. Next slide, please. I mentioned EDA's role in the planning side of economic development, and that's really foundational, fundamental to EDA and kind of what we do. For those of you that have heard me speak on the subject before, I always mention, but I can never say enough, that this concept that good economic development starts with good economic development planning, and we strongly believe that at EDA. And our planning program, which is really focused on helping local and regional organizations with both their short and long-term economic development planning efforts, are really about a couple things. It's a reflection of the fact that we see inherent value in the planning process and in the collaboration that comes from economic development planning and the different, private, public, nonprofit sectors, all the players in economic development coming together in this planning activity in and of itself is valuable. But we've also tied that concept of planning to our implementation grants. So if you're interested in accessing EDA funding for some help with some of the implementation grants around infrastructure construction, for example, it needs to be tied to an asset-based strategic plan, this concept of economic development strategic planning. And that really is intended to prevent one-off projects and making sure that the goals and objectives that you're trying to achieve through this particular project align with the assets, the challenges, the opportunities in your particular region, and that's kind of been thought through so that we're not, funding a project that may sound good or look good on paper, but may not match up with the assets that may be in your particular region. The other thing I should point out too is that this isn't just an EDA concept or idea. There are a lot of other federal agencies that are kind of getting on board with this idea that implementation should be tied to planning. And the great example there is USDA rural development. Has a particular program that requires a certain percentage of that funding to be tied back to an asset-based regional strategic plan. And what we found is in many cases, the CEDS from EDA become that plan that they tie back to. So we're really excited about that. The planning program in general, though, is really a source of the establishment of a network, and Brett mentioned this earlier, of what we call economic development districts. And these are EDA designated and funded regional organizations that basically have come together. Most of them are groupings of counties and that have said, hey, we're an economic region. We share a number of the same opportunities, the same number of challenges and assets, and we think that we are an actual economic development region. And their primary goal is to develop and implement and update a comprehensive economic development strategy, the CEDS. We've mentioned that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And the districts are one of EDA's most important and valued partners and stakeholders. First and foremost, they often serve a role as kind of the boots on the ground for EDA when there's an economic disruption or there is an issue of some kind. They're always the ones we go to first to say, hey, what's happening? What's going on there? And they're the ones, because they're closest to what's going on, able to provide that kind of information. And they also are really effective in terms of information sharing and this kind of collaboration amongst the different players in economic development in that particular region. And they often serve that convener role, which is another reason why they're so important to EDA. As Brett mentioned, there are 398 EDDs spanning the U.S. that covers about 84-ish% of the country. And they, not only are they key partners for EDA, but they also should be key partners at the state level. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide. As I mentioned before, the CEDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies, the CEDS is really a strategy-driven plan. We often refer to it as an economic development blueprint for kind of where that region wants to go from an economic development perspective. It is a plan, but it's also very much a collaborative planning process that really, as I mentioned before, incorporates a really broad array of perspective. It brings together the public sector, the private sector, nonprofits, educational institutions, workforce organizations, really to help local governments, regional governments better understand, position, and leverage their regional assets. Mentioned that before. And the CEDS really, if you think about what I mentioned earlier, when it comes to economic development capacity building, the role of the public sector in economic development, this concept of capacity building, if you think about that, really what the CEDS is, and both from a plan and a process perspective, is really to plan how to build that capacity for economic development. That's really how we look at it. The document itself, the CEDS document, has a number of common content areas: the summary background, the SWOT, action plan, evaluation framework, and it also needs to include economic resilience, really how that region is going to withstand or recover from any type of major disruption or shock to the underlying economic base. That's really a key point. So there are a number of common content areas, but each set is very much individualized. And that's because, as many of you know, economic development is a very broad field, and a lot of things feed into a locality or region's economic development. So one CEDS may very much be focused on housing, and another might be focused on broadband or energy or the environment. It really depends on what's going on in that particular region. So from that perspective, they're individualized. And then from another perspective, the look and feel of the document is also encouraged to be different based on what the needs are of that particular region, and not only talking with its decision makers, but also the public and other key stakeholders in that region. So for some EDDs that put together the CEDS and other entities, a traditional 8.5 by 11 document works really well. And in other cases, CEDS are much more effective for what they're trying to achieve from that perspective. So from both of those perspectives, the content of the CEDS is very much individualized. In terms of that flexibility that I talked about earlier and what we're trying to encourage, we really are trying to, and often try to point our districts and others that are putting together the CEDS or updating the CEDS to what we call the CEDS content guidelines, which is really a guidance document intended to provide recommendations on, what goes into the CEDS, but it's very heavy on tools and resources and best practices, really things that are going to help that particular organization create a impactful, strong, strategic, regional economic development plan. Next slide. A couple key takeaways before I go. Just wanted to mention that, and you've heard me say this a few times, but it's worth repeating, that the concept from our perspective is that economic development is inherently regional, which is, again, the primary focus of the EDDs and the CEDS. And that really stems from the fact that communities are interdependent. They often have similar opportunities and challenges kind of up and down the board, and the impacts that they are dealing with, both positive and negative impacts. These things cross jurisdictional boundaries. No surprise here, but the asset focus of the CEDS and the work that is done from an economic development planning perspective is very much regional in nature, and the things that they're focused on from an asset perspective are things that clearly cross regional jurisdictional boundaries. Things like environmental assets or educational systems, things like that. So very much from our perspective is regional. And then just this concept that communities obviously can accomplish much more when they work together. And part of that working together is this concept of plan alignment, which we have been viewing as something that's very critical, particularly for the last number of years. And that's plan alignment, not just across platforms, but between states and regional plans as well. And this concept of plan alignment and working together is kind of twofold. Sure, it prevents duplication, so you're not working at cross purposes, but it's also intended to increase impact, so that everybody doing hazard mitigation planning and economic development planning, they're working they're moving in the same direction, trying to achieve the same goals in the long run, even though their activities may be slightly different. So plan alignment is something that's really, really critical. Other thing I should mention too is that, at least from a state EDD perspective and CEDS perspective, the planning that goes on there, it's really a two-way street. So we highly recommend that the states are aware of the economic development planning and the activities and the assets and the things that are happening at the regional level. But it also works the other way as well, and we very much encourage that the districts are in collaboration with activities or efforts that are going on at the state level, and that there's a lot of cross communication that happens to the benefit of both. I think I'll stop there. For more information on EDA, you can find it at our website, as I mentioned before, at eda.gov, and more information particularly on the planning program and the CEDS in particular can be found at eda.gov/CEDS. And with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Brett.
Awesome, excellent, Dave. Well, thanks so much for the presentation as always, and for all the good work that you and your colleagues are doing at EDA. We've really valued our partnership with EDA over the years, and we've seen firsthand, the positive and transformative impact that economic development districts can have on their regions and in turn their states, often guided by the CEDS. So thanks so much for that background as we move through here. So just want to share a few quick slides before we turn things over to Merab. I like to say we're really living in a golden age of the CEDS since 2015 with the release of those content guidelines from EDA that Dave just mentioned. And so through these guidelines, EDA has really empowered regions to plan and implement the CEDS that are more inclusive, more engaging, and more interesting really than ever before. And that's certainly reflected in both the process and the CEDS document itself. And I always love showing this slide because it really shows how far we've come with the CEDS. On the left side of the screen is kind of the big bad CEDS of the past, which, as you can see, was a giant binder full of texts and charts and statistics. Looks like some sticky notes there too. But it had very little life and personality. So this is an actual CEDS from the early 2000s. And then on the right side of the screen, you can see the new CEDS that are being created today, which are much more visually engaging. They're really meant for public consumption. And they embrace good design, good visuals, infographics, and much more. As Dave mentioned, the next generation of CEDS are really taking things a step further and moving them online into a virtual platform where they can be multimedia resources with maps, videos, and much more that you see on the right side of the screen. So if you've never worked with the CEDS before, or it's been a long time since you have, this is kind of the next generation of what the regions and districts are compiling. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity to use this as a real kind of roadmap and strategic plan for the regions. So just also wanted to point out, if you're interested in learning more about the CEDS, all the resources we've developed at NATO are available online and for free at our companion website, cedscentral.com. So we've got webinar recordings, presentation slides, case studies, and videos on all things CEDS, including a CEDS 101 section if you want to learn more about the process. So the site is updated often, so make sure to check back to get the latest and greatest from the world of the CEDS. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Meryl Kagos, who is the program manager at CREC. Meryl is going to talk a little bit more about the project that we're working on that Rachel mentioned earlier and some of the early findings we've discovered from this work. So Meryl, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Brett, and good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, I am with the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, which is leading a project team to better understand and grow state-regional collaboration. Our partners on this project include the National Association of Development Organizations, or NATO, the State International Development Organizations, or SIDO, and the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative. And we're so fortunate to have the Economic Development Administration fund this work, but I do need to add that this presentation, statements, findings, conclusions, and recommendations are those of the project team and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Economic Development Administration or the U.S. Department of Commerce. Now, I just want to note the collaborative nature of state and regional initiatives. I don't want us to feel as though alignment is sufficient. We all know certain issues are important, such as broadband, childcare, business development, international engagement, just to name a few. But the key is what states and economic development districts, and many of which are recognized by EDA, as Dave stated earlier, are doing to collaborate to solve problems and propel solutions. And for this project, we recognize that economic recovery and growth may be suboptimal due to poorly aligned state and regional economic development strategies and investments. We often see states and economic development districts are planning and executing independent approaches that do not necessarily build on one another, are oftentimes not appropriately coordinated, or even may even operate at cross purposes. So this project will, aim to improve collaboration by documenting where it's occurring successfully, by helping states and regions design and leverage common recovery and resiliency plans, and by promoting better alignment in state and regional strategies to ensure more impactful implementation. So our goal is to develop a more coherent planning process in which states and regions account for one another's efforts in their economic development planning, which includes state strategies, the regional comprehensive economic development strategies. As Dave said earlier, they're called CEDS, as well as program implementation efforts, including public investments. So this project is composed of 3 work areas, including research, education, and technical assistance. A big part of our research has been focused on mapping state economic development strategies against the CEDS developed by regional organizations to identify gaps in collaboration and identify any promising examples of best practices. And as you heard earlier from Rachel, this was a huge task. We reviewed 52 states, territories, and the District of Columbia, as well as CEDS for 379 economic development districts. So we're in our initial early stages of analysis, but we did find some themes that have emerged. So generally speaking, most plans include workforce development, industry cluster development, as well as business development. But we are also finding that CEDS are more likely to focus on broadband and other infrastructure, including transportation infrastructure, whereas state plans are a little bit more likely to mention technology-based economic development, strategies, as well as business finance and business climate issues, as well as strategies on manufacturing and international trade. In fact, only 18% of economic development districts have a strategy targeting international engagement. So clearly there are some differences in strategic focus. On the other hand, there are opportunities where strategies are mentioned in both state and CEDS plans, one being entrepreneurial development, which includes the development of incubators, opportunities for mentorship and technical assistance. We did find states have a little bit more emphasis on venture capital. And this is an interesting example where we're seeing common strategic themes are a clear opportunity for collaboration. And I'm sure, as in this example around entrepreneurial development, many economic development districts would probably like to see some of the venture capital funds coming to their region. Another opportunity for collaborations around business development. Business retention, small business development, and business attraction are great examples of similar strategies seen in most state strategic plans and CEDS. Another opportunity is actually around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're seeing CEDS are targeting youth, low-income individuals, as well as individuals with disabilities. States are also targeting youths and individuals with disabilities, as well as underserved minorities. And from this, we can say that states and regions can build upon these intersections and drive collaboration on related issues. We also done some research on the $1 million grants provided by EDA to states. Our preliminary findings indicate that 2/3 of states will be depending on economic development districts to assist them in implementing initiatives funded by this grant, but yet less than 10% of states indicated they included regional organizations in the grant application or planning process. Given that solid planning usually results in a higher chance of success, state and regional collaboration upfront on grants like this really could make a difference. Having a bottom-up planning rather than top-down action is a key element of high levels of performance. Ultimately, we want to better understand and develop the pockets of collaboration within states in the EDA regions. Our education efforts, which is the second project deliverable area, kind of builds on this research by raising awareness of this project and the opportunities to collaborate. For example, we're developing a best practices guidebook that will highlight the cream of the crop in state and regional collaboration. Our partners, including NATO and CIDO, will be playing a key role in identifying best practices in given areas. And our last deliverable area, and potentially the most impactful in the short run, is providing one-on-one technical assistance to states and economic development districts, where we will help them identify key areas of potential collaboration and how to move the ball forward to improve everyone's chances of economic success. So research, education, and technical assistance are all contributing to help us identify ways to help states and economic development districts on their activities and improving their chances of success. Now there will be strategies that don't overlap, and we recognize that, and that's okay. One collaborative opportunity may not work for another region. But when less than 30% of economic development districts at a recent conference indicated that they have good collaborative relationships with their state, you have to be excited about the opportunities to improve performance. And this is especially true when poor communication is among the reasons noted for the lack of collaboration, which we believe is an easy solve. And now let me be clear with my communication, and I'll pass back the conversation to Brett.
Excellent, Mara. Well, thank you so much for the presentation and update, and real big hats off to you and the project team for all that heavy lift with the research, compiling information and kind of crosswalking the regional and state plans. And now we get, the fun really starts now by taking that information and designing trainings and technical assistance and some of those best practices. So Mara, thank you so much for that. Before I move on to the presentation, just want to encourage anyone, if you do have any questions, to please put them into the questions box, and we'll get to those shortly. But I'm really excited now to to turn things over to Joe Barker and Brooksy Carlton from Tennessee. And Joe and Brooksy will be in conversation and just have a chance to really share what this looks like in action on the ground with partners at the state and regional levels that have worked together for many years, what the value is in having these partnerships and some of the impacts we've seen. So Brooksy and Joe, when you're ready, feel free to turn on your webcams. And Joe, I'll send you a request to turn yours on as well. And looking forward to hearing your presentations. Excellent, great. So Joe and Brooksy, we can see you both. Thanks so much again.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Joe Barker, and I'm Executive Director of Southwest Tennessee Development District, and our organization serves 8 counties and 35 cities in Southwest Tennessee. And I'm very excited to be on today with our great partner, Brooksy Carlton, who works for the state of Tennessee. And I think what we wanted to do today is just have a conversation about how our 9 development districts work in collaboration with the state, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, as we put together our CEDS and work with our communities in this collaboration, we also know that state government is the government that is closest to the people in our area, and nearly all projects we work on, maybe with the acceptance of EDA, where we work directly with EDA, but just about everyone else is a collaboration between our districts, our communities, and the state of Tennessee. So with that, I'll let Brooksy introduce herself, and we'll just have a conversation. Brooksy.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So Brooksy Carlton, I'm with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. That is our Tennessee's Department of Commerce, basically, is how it might. Our business development team does a lot of recruitment of businesses, expansion of businesses, manages our incentive programs. I am on the community and rural development side, and we work with all the communities across Tennessee, especially the most rural and most distressed communities. We manage programs. We have an industrial site development program. We manage federal funding from HUD, as well as from places like the Appalachian Regional Commission and Delta Regional Authority. We have small business and entrepreneurship programs that fall under us. We do a kind of a program that we call 3-Star, that is our general community development program. We do downtown development. So we have a wide range of programs that help prepare our communities for the business development side of our department to recruit industry.
I want to talk a little bit about the planning side of it. As those who are on the webinar today know, as you put together the CEDS, then you're in contact with your local communities to roll this into a comprehensive plan. I can tell you we believe strongly in asset-based strategic planning, and I'll talk particularly about our 8 counties. We actually do an individual strategic plan for each of our 8 counties and cities that are within those counties, and then we roll that into the regional plan that is the CEDS. I think one thing we all need to think about when we talk about asset-based planning is this document must be a living, breathing document. You know, all of us have been involved in strategic planning for a lot of years, and far too often we get a nice binder and we've got great things and great statistics, and it goes on a shelf somewhere and it's sort of forgotten. What we do in our district, we actually have an employee that is dedicated to completing the CEDS, but also working with our individual communities on a regular basis. We actually try to meet in each of our counties quarterly to go over their individual plans, to see where they are on their priorities, the timelines that they have set. And so asset-based planning as part of the process is key. Now, I think the other thing that is key is in every one of our sessions, we have someone from the State Department of Economic and Community Development present. Each of our districts are aligned with a regional director, and we try to not have any meetings that person is not involved and giving their input, and so that we make sure we're aligned with the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, and I think David and Mara both said something about duplicating, being careful not to duplicate services, and EDA wants to make sure we don't duplicate any work. And I think that's one of the things Merib's team is looking at. And that is something that's really important to ECD as well. We actually have funding from our state legislature that flows through our department to each of our development districts to assist with funding some of their staffing, some of their planning initiatives, things like that. And one of the things, because I coordinate that, to get their contract set up every year, we require them to submit their CEDS. What is your strategic plan for the year? How is this funding going to be used? In hopes that nobody is creating a separate document for that, as Joe said, they're out in their communities quarterly. They know what's going on. They develop their CEDS. They keep their CEDS updated. They make sure it is that living document, and then they can just pass that along to us. That way I review all the CEDS, so I see what's going on across the 9 regions in the state, and we know at ECD how our work relates to what they're doing on the ground every day. And so that's something that, we don't want to make anybody do any additional work, especially if there's something very similar that's already out there that we can use.
Other thing you might want to touch on, Brooksy, is prior to the pandemic, the 9 development districts had a monthly meeting in Nashville where the directors all come together and we talk about current programs, what issues, if there are any challenges. And I think since the pandemic, we're just now getting back into meeting in person again. But the key to it is when we meet in Nashville, we actually meet in the building where the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development is located. And the reason we do that is to make it easily accessible, not only to ECD, but our other partners with the state, so that they can attend these meetings and be a part of our discussions. And I think, Brooksy, that's been one of the keys to our partnership.
Yeah, I think that is a great meeting. It's a big commitment. A lot of y'all know how big Tennessee is. It is a big commitment from somebody from Northeast Tennessee to drive to Nashville once a month for this meeting. I think it's beneficial to the development districts because you get to see, the people that are doing the same job as you and really get to talk through issues. And they are kind enough to give me a spot on the agenda every meeting. So I am at nearly every meeting. If I can't be there, there's usually a couple people from my team that go to the meeting. We talk about what grant opportunities are going to be coming up, what applications we're reviewing, that we're scoring, that we're about to announce. We discuss program updates. We run ideas by the development district. Again, they're the ones that are on the ground doing this. We say, what if we changed this grant program to do X, Y, Z? They can say, nope, that wouldn't work, or yes, that'd be a great idea. It hits an area that we've been missing. We talk about budget. We've had some budget issues over the last couple of years since COVID and continuing through to this year. And meeting with the development districts has been a really good way to talk through, okay, here's what our budget looks like this year. It's not as big as we expected it to be. What program should we prioritize? And they can kind of help us with, lining up our programs with what the community need is. It's a good opportunity to make sure that every community in the state knows what is coming up, knows what grant applications are out there, because we can communicate it in one meeting where we hit all 9 executive directors, and they can carry it back to each of their individual communities. They know how to communicate with those communities better than we do. They see them every day and can pass along the information. So it's a really effective way for our department and our division to communicate with all the communities across the state.
I think another key is the fact that, we work with the folks at ECD primarily that what I term are the people with the boots on the ground that do the nuts and bolts of the work. And somebody like Brooksy has transcended several administrations, both political parties. So, you know, what we want is continuity with the State Department. We want them to know what we're doing. We want to let them know that we're willing to assist them in any way. And I think that's one reason that we've been successful in the state. And I hope, Brooksy, that they look to us as just an extension of their department, that they know that they can call on us because we actually have the staff to do many of the things that they want to do.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I do feel like the development districts can be an extension of our staff. That, you know, our rural development division has 20 people when we're fully staffed up. So we cannot be in every community every day or every week or every month. And so to rely on the development districts to kind of pass the word along, to help develop applications, to help our communities do the planning so that they can take advantage of our programs is something that is really important. And I think one example of how that has worked well that we've done just in the last couple of months is, you know, we had some CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, COVID recovery funding. And so we kind of said, what's going on in your communities? What is keeping people from going back to work? And one of the things we heard from the communities was access to and affordability of childcare. And so we, you know, set up here in the tower. It's literally, our office is literally called the Tower. And we said, okay, we can develop a program to help with childcare. And so we decided we could use that CDBG COVID money to address childcare. And then we basically got stuck with what else is needed. And what we ended up doing is coming to several of the development district meetings. They even called some special meetings of the development district directors along with their staff who would be working on this. And we said, what can we do? And we ended up doing a formula. So we took the amount of funding that we had available. We divided it up amongst our 9 development districts based on population and some other factors. We said, okay, here is what your allocation would be. You can use this portion of it for admin to run the program, but then you set up your own program. And so we were able, because we had such a good relationship with the development districts, to bring in our Department of Human Services, who had not worked as much with the development districts in the past, and say, okay, we are going to, the ECD and DHS are going to partner together. We're going to give an allocation to each of the 9 development districts, and they're going to tell us how they need to spend it. So that allowed each of the development districts to say, okay, I have a particular community that I want to focus on that needs daycare, or I want to focus on facilities, or this community has 0 licensed daycare facilities, so we're going to focus on home-based in this community. And we were able to say, just send us a plan, tell us what you're going to do, tell us how you're going to spend the money. And, you know, as long as you're following all those federal rules that come with doing a CDBG program, and it falls in line with these program guidelines, you can develop the best program for your region. And that I think took, and Joe, you can speak to how y'all did it, but I think that took our partnership to a new level, is where we said, here's your allocation, you tell us what you're going to do, you tell us how you need to serve your community, and we will support you with kind of the back end of the grants management process.
I agree, Brooksy. That program has worked tremendously well. I think because the state allowed the development districts the leeway and really, I guess, vetting the projects before we sent them to the state, and that way we could really cover our entire district. The one thing, Brett, I want to end on is something the other thing I think that has been really good for the relationship has been, each year we have a 2-day conference in Nashville. And we come to Nashville during the legislative session, and we have training for staff, and we bring different people in, and we like to bring people from various departments of the state. But the other thing we do is we have a breakfast that recognizes our legislators, and they seem to really enjoy that. It gives them an opportunity to learn more about what the districts do, but also keeps us in touch with them, because you know, ultimately, the money that the state ECD receives comes from the state of Tennessee when they approve their budget, and we just want to make sure they know about our partnership. So with that, Brooksy, if you've got a few last words, and then we'll take any questions you might have.
Yeah, I think that's it. Well, we're happy to answer questions and talk more about the good partnership that we have.
Excellent. All right. Well, Brooksy and Joe, thank you so much for the discussion here. And again, the partnership that exists between the districts and the states, I think is a real inspiration for others around the country. So we really wanted to highlight the great work happening in Tennessee. And thanks again for sharing that with us. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to ask everybody to turn their cams on and bring everyone back here. And I'm just going to kind of maybe rapid fire run through a few that have come through for the group here. So it looks like we're all excellent. Great. Here we go. Hollywood Squares in full effect. But first question here is for Dave. Just a question came through about kind of, there was a remark made about the $1 million grants that went out to the states through EDA. And just a question about kind of what do you see the future between EDA and the states with either more funding or partnerships? What does that future look like? And then also a question through about more economic development districts being designated. Is that something that EDA is looking for as well?
Yeah, I'll start with the second one. Yeah, we're always looking for communities that are interested in coming together, as I had said, in saying that they are an economic region and noting the assets and the challenges and the opportunities that they're sharing together, in putting forth a package to be designated by EDA. We usually have maybe up to a half a dozen new EDDs designated each year. So the number is growing. Like as Brett and I both mentioned, it's close to 400 now. We're probably expecting it to get even higher. So yeah, we think, because this concept of economic development planning is so foundational to not only EDA, but just the concept of economic development in general, we're always looking for those entities and organizations that are looking to continue that and to foster that concept of planning. So that's the first one. And the second one was the relationship between EDA and the states. I think, prior to the funding that came out under ARPA, under this past year, the state planning activities, I think EDA had some very good relationships with a number of states on a number of different levels, particularly smaller states where there may not be a lot of economic development districts or a lot of other entities, and that was the main opportunity for EDA and those states to interact. But I think on the other side of it, for most states, there just hasn't been a lot of interaction between EDA and the states, and I think that's really an untapped potential. I think there is an opportunity for increased communication and interaction between the states and EDA. And I think one of the ways we've done that in the past is, we've seen a number of state level CEDS that have been funded in part by EDA, where we've supported different districts kind of rolling up their activities across a particular state and helping work with the state on a state level district. So state level CEDS. I think things like that in the future could definitely happen. So yeah, I think in general, EDA is looking for more interactions with states as an additional stakeholder.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dave. So a joint question here for Joe and Brooksy. And Joe, I also have to thank you. I know you're taking time out of your vacation to join us. A special recognition to you. Thanks for that. But there's a question here about just kind of mentioning that the relationship between the districts and the states in this particular state isn't very evolved as much as we've seen in Tennessee. And so just a question here about kind of what's a good first step to try to start moving towards those kind of better partnerships and relationships. We could kind of think of one. You gave a lot of really great examples today, but is there kind of one thing that could maybe get some of that partnership moving forward?
Brooksy, you want to?
I mean, I think the thing that kicked it off for us was the monthly meetings, just having regular conversation. It is the third Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. and we all know that now, and it's all on our calendars every month. And just, you know, I think it started with just, hey, we're going to keep each other updated, and it has naturally progressed into now we're going to partner with each other. And we're going to rely on each other for guidance about how do we do whatever project we're working on at the time.
And I'll just add to that, you know, we all think the in-person meeting is best, but we found out during the pandemic that we could meet virtually. And so if you have difficulties getting everyone together in person, the monthly virtual meetings, we didn't miss a beat. We did that every month. So I just encourage that.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And final last question here, joint for Rachel and Mara. Rachel, great to see you. Glad you got the webcam going here. But just some questions
Somehow
about
it worked.
Perfect. Better late than never. We'll get to see you here. But just kind of, we heard a lot about kind of the upcoming kind of trainings and events and resources. So just a question here about how we're going to find out information about that website, all sorts of things. So if either of you want to talk about from the CREC and CITO side and just how it all kind of comes together on this, just what folks can expect in the pipeline.
Sure. I'll start off with our website. We're actually currently compiling all our information to one webpage, stateeconomicdevelopment.org, where we have a state local alignment webpage. So there you'll find, and I'll try to drop this in the chat as well, where you can find all our previous webinars, any write-ups on blogs. We're currently working to get that big database of the matrix of the CEDS and state strategic plans into a database, and also getting that housed on the website. So that's forthcoming. And I guess, Rachel, you want to take the question around the TA in Seattle?
Yeah, sure. So actually, there were a couple of things I was going to mention. So first and foremost, one thing I did want to mention too is one of the projects that we have been working with CREC to sort of also congregate some of this information is with the USA Competes website that's recently been relaunched. That was one of the deliverables that the CITO members and our staff have been doing on our end to redevelop that as part of this project. It's been a really great tool because not only has it given the EDOs opportunities to learn about international engagement for the international side, but then also it's also provided some resources for COVID-19 recovery relief, which is where I'm hoping at the tail end of some of that. So if anyone is interested in just checking out the newly relaunched site, I would recommend checking out usacompetes.com, and you can take a look at that. We've also done several different strategy meetings, focus groups through our CITO membership group and all of our trainings to learn a little bit more about this. But then on top of it, one of the things that Merab and Mark are going to be doing next month is coming to a conference that we will be hosting. We host a conference for all of our CITO members twice a year. Usually we have a conference in Washington, D.C. in March. And then in the summertime, we have a conference in a different location, usually try to go west. So the next one's coming up in Seattle, Washington. The Washington's Department of State Department, the Washington Department of State, I always screw up the acronym, will be hosting us this year. So the Washington Department of Commerce is going to be there as our state liaison. They're co-hosting with us. And so Mark and Merab will be actually in attendance at the conference, and they'll be able to have some conversations directly with states, and they would love to meet with some of our members to learn about some of the work that they're currently doing. So if that's something that you are interested, please get a hold of me or my executive director, Andy Corellis, and we can get meetings and connections set up for you guys to meet Merab, who will be there, and then also her colleague, Mark Tropy, as well. So yeah, I think that's some great opportunities for some resources for everyone.
Wonderful, excellent. So yeah, a lot of good things to be looking forward to in the upcoming month and year. So we're pushing up on 5 o'clock in the East. So I did want to thank Brooksy, Merab, Rachel, Dave, and Joe for taking the time today. Really great conversation. I hope it inspired all of you that joined us today to really think about kind of the value and the opportunities that are available when we do kind of partner and work together. As I mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded, so you'll get an email tomorrow with the recording. So please share it with any of your colleagues or partners who you think might be interested. It'll also be up on the websites that we mentioned today as well. And then last but not least, I know it's past 5 o'clock on the East, but if you have a second or two after we close out, there will be a short survey that will pop up on the screen. So just fill that out. Really helps us kind of improve our offerings and make sure that we're providing content and resources that meet your goals and needs. So with that, I'll send all of you on your way. Thanks again so much to our speakers and to all of you for joining us. And we'll see you at a future webinar. So be well and enjoy the rest of your summer. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care.